Good morning. Welcome to CADCorp's webinar titled Managing Grounds Maintenance Using GIS Data Capture to Deliver Commercial Value. Before we begin this morning, following the webinar, we will send you the recording. So if you want to listen back, please do so and utilize that recording. We'll have a questions panel, which you should already see within the webinar interface. Please ask questions throughout the webinar this morning. We will love to answer them at the end. We've got some time set aside to answer those at the end, so do answer questions throughout, and we'll review those and answer them at the end. We'll have a survey as well, so when the webinar ends, you'll have just a few questions. If you could answer that survey, it's great to get some feedback and understand a bit more about you, and that helps us plan future events and future webinars. So please do complete that for us. You're all muted, so you'll only be able to hear the presenters today. We can't hear you. So like I said, if you want to get in touch and ask any questions, use that questions panel in the webinar interface and we'll answer those later on. We have some more webinars coming up over the next few weeks, so do look out for those. You can register using the link there, or you'll probably get an email, or you can see from the CADCorp website more information about these 3 webinars that are coming up. We've got almost 200 people registered for this webinar today, so we found it a really useful way to keep everyone up to date and for everyone to learn more about GIS and CADCorp technologies. So they've been really successful. So do continue to attend as you see relevant. My name is Fergus Craig. I'm Business Development Manager here at CADCorp. I work with our housing customers and other commercial markets within the UK. I'm going to be presenting today with my colleague, Simon Parker. Simon's our pre-sales team leader, so Simon's my technical colleague. He's going to be demonstrating the concepts that I'll be talking about in just a few minutes. So the plan is I'll talk a little bit about the presentation topic today, and then I'll hand over to Simon, who's going to utilize CADCorp technology to demonstrate those concepts to you. So the agenda, I'll start talking a little bit about CADCorp and just to tell you about who we are and what we do. Looking at the delegate list today, I know that many of you know us, but there's quite a few people who are new to CADCorp, so that's where I'll start. We'll have a look at the considerations of a data capture project, the things you need to think about before you get going with it. And then we'll look at the different data types which you can utilize within the process. And the actual concept of capturing data using Geographical Information Systems, that's GIS technology itself, we'll discuss. We'll have a look at the different reporting and sharing techniques, and we'll have a review of real life successes. So we've got a couple of case studies which we'll discuss as well. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Simon, who will do a demonstration of all these different concepts. And then after that, we'll come back to me and we'll try and answer all of your questions right at the end there. We're planning for it to be about 45 minutes today, so maybe give or take 5 minutes. That's our aim today. So CADCorp is a UK-based software development company. We create the CADCorp Spatial Information System, which we call CADCorp SIS. That's a desktop geographical information system, a GIS, and also web and mobile mapping applications as well, all based on that CADCorp SIS core technology. We work with lots of different industry sectors. I can see that many of you today are from housing organisations or local government organisations, but there's many of you from other sectors as well. We work widely within emergency services, insurance and infrastructure, in addition to those 2 sectors. So we're just going to launch a poll, which you should see in front of you just now. Well, in a few seconds. And we're asking you, has your organization undertaken a data capture project before? So you should see that question. If you can either click yes or no, that'll give us a really good feedback about the audience that we're speaking to today and about your experiences with data capture. So I can see that lots of people are answering the question, which is great. And I'll just keep it going for a few more seconds to give the opportunity to click on that. I know that with previous webinars, it sometimes for some people takes a couple of seconds for that to pop up. So I'll give you just a few seconds. So has your organization undertaken a data capture project before? Excellent. So so it's actually 75% yes and 25% no. So that's a really interesting really interesting response actually. So yeah, many of you have, but there's also quite a lot of you which haven't undertaken a data capture project before. So for those of you who have, hopefully you'll learn something additional today. For those of you who haven't, there's probably a lot of information here today which you can go away and utilize. So the considerations of a data capture project. Before I get into this, it would be good just to outline what a data capture project is. So what we're proposing in today's webinar is utilizing geographical information systems. Now, GIS is the capability in this context to create geographical data and then analyze it and report using that data. So it's all about being able to capture areas or points or lines using a software application called GIS. And by doing this in a data capture project specifically for grounds maintenance, enables you to be very precise and enables you to get a good understanding of your responsibilities as an organization about what work needs doing on the ground. There's lots of different ways in which our customers utilize this data. Sometimes you're a housing organization and you've got a lot of communal grounds that need to be maintained. You might have had a large-scale voluntary transfer of your properties in the past, and with that came lots of communal areas such as grass areas and shrubberies and bushes and trees and hard standing car parks, that type of thing. And all of these need regular maintenance to ensure that they're safe and they're maintained for people to enjoy as well. So being able to capture this data, if you're outsourcing your grounds maintenance to a third-party contractor, for example, without knowing exactly what work needs to be done, the third-party contractor can never be sure exactly what they're going to be doing throughout the year. So it's so to respond to those tender quotes, the information that we've got from our customers that the contractors will tend to overestimate what work needs to be done, which is understandable. They will overestimate the work that needs to be done to ensure that they've got everything covered and that they can afford to carry out the work once the tender starts. So by capturing the data and getting a really good understanding of exactly how much grass areas, for example, how many grass areas and the exact square meterage of those grass areas need to actually be cut, enables you to go to tender and actually put in that tender documentation a bill of quantities, maps, and precise information about what work needs to be done. And what our customers have seen, those tender responses have come back at a much lower level because they've got a really good, those contractors have got a really good understanding of the work that needs to be done. They can be confident about what work needs to be done, so they don't need to overestimate because they know exactly what work needs to be done. They can come back with very competitive quotes. So that's really the main key driver for doing this kind of work, but there's lots of other reasons why you might want to do it as well. Many organizations don't contract out grounds maintenance and it's an internal function, but even so, it's really good to understand exactly what work needs to be done. We've heard reports of organizations maintaining land that they don't own. So they are maintaining land which they assumed was their responsibility, but it might not have been the case. So you're doing more work than you need to be doing, therefore the cost to your organization's higher than it needs to be. So even if it's something that is an internal function, getting a good understanding of what's going on the ground can be very beneficial and potentially cost saving as well. There's lots of other benefits of being able to capture this data and understanding your responsibilities, and they'll come out throughout the webinar today. But the first point here is understanding the objectives of your project. So why are you wanting to capture this data? Is it to go out to a tender? Is it to get an internal understanding? That kind of discussion and that understanding internally will be really important. And feel free to call CADcorp and talk to us, and we can talk you through this because we've got lots of experience working with different organizations doing this. Another consideration is what should actually be recorded. As you probably know, there's so many different asset types out there, and you could go crazy. You could have so many different asset types, and you could try and record absolutely everything you have, which might be beneficial, but there's lots of limitations to that as well. It's the whole process will be longer, more complex, has you know, and you might not need all of that information as well. So we really encourage our customers to try and be as concise as possible, not to get too carried away with capturing too many asset types, and really focus on what really needs to be done, which just makes the whole process easier and easier to manage in the long run. So who's going to collect the data? You've got a few different options. So one of the case studies I'll come on to later is a case study where CADcorp used GIS technology to automate this process. The type of data that this organization wanted to extract was all included within different data sets. So we could use automated processes within GIS technology to capture that data. So that's a bit of work that CADcorp did. We know that there's many data capture organizations use CADcorp technology to do this work. So that's a really good option. We're doing a project just now with CA Design, who use CADcorp technology, and they've got a lot of experience in doing this kind of data capture work. So they're often a good organization to be able to do this and outsource this kind of work on your behalf. Alternatively, you could do this yourself. So CADcorp can train you in the use of the tools, and we can help you create the workflow and the reporting on that for your own staff, or maybe temporary members of staff, to come in and complete this process on internally on your working within the organization. So you've got a few different options about how you want to complete the whole process. Who needs the results? It's good to consider this early on at the beginning, because if you're going to be putting this out to tender and therefore making this data publicly available, essentially, then you really need to consider what data is within the spectrum of the project, and also deciding on what data gets shared at the end. So what attributes and what properties and ownership information and all of this needs to just be considered about when you're starting out initially. And there's lots of ways in which you can share the results as well. I'm going to come on to this a little bit later. You can see the screenshot on this slide is a PDF that's using a book plotter application within CADcorp Sys Desktop, which can automatically generate a print booklet effectively of the map areas, and contains sums of grass areas and hard standing, and you can define exactly what's in there. But there's lots of different ways in which you can get the data out, whether it's a CSV, a PDF, just a GIS data format, web mapping, and we're going to look at Power BI as well and how that can be useful. So there's a few different data types which are really useful in this whole process. The Ordnance Survey, many of you will be aware, produced the OS master map topography layer, which, as you can see in the screenshot, is each individual building outline. But there's a lot of land use type classifications in this data set as well. And you might find that the land classifications within master map actually will provide everything that you need to complete the project, as one of our customers have done very recently. There are limitations of that for many projects it doesn't include all of the data classifications, all of the land use classifications that you need. So, but it's just worth considering, absolutely, if it's appropriate for your project. If it is, then GIS, I mentioned, has tools to automatically extract areas that intersect your land ownership. So it's a really easy and quick and efficient and accurate way to extract data, because we've got that very accurate Ordnance Survey data as well. Master map imagery layer is also particularly useful, or any other kind of imagery data can give you a really good understanding of what is going on the ground. You can quite easily see whether it's hard standing or grass or something else using the imagery data. So if you want to complete your grounds maintenance data capture as a desktop exercise, that means without going out on site, then the imagery data, imagery layer from MasterMap or other imagery data sets that you might have access to is very useful. There's limitations of that as well. You might have large tree canopies which are obscuring the view, or other things which, the imagery data, like all data sets, are a snapshot in time as well. So you just need to consider that, whether the imagery data is when that image was taken and what might have changed between now and then. The land registry title information is really important. This will define, will give you a clear understanding anyway of the responsibilities, your ownership. So the land registry have all of the land titles that are registered with the land registry available as GIS data formats, which you can get from the land registry, or many of our housing customers get this data from EMAP site, who can provide that data on the land registry's behalf. It's good working with EMAP site because they can search on the data and do quite advanced queries on the data to extract the actual data that you need as well. So that tends to work quite well for many of our customers. But this will give you an understanding of the actual land that is registered. So it will give you a really good understanding of your portfolio and what your responsibilities are on the ground to manage those assets and liabilities. It's not perfect. Our customers have found errors in the data, areas where it's not included or it's not quite right, and it's obviously not a replacement for the actual title document itself, but it's a really useful data set and gives you that great understanding, and it's a data set that many of our customers will use in this whole process as a defining point. So the data capture project itself is the process itself. We recommend using CAD Corp Sys Desktop, our desktop GIS, because there's advanced data capture tools within the application which enable you to utilize any underlying data, such as the Ordnance Survey MasterMap topography layer. You can snap to that underlying data, or you can make freehand data capture, or you can just copy polygons that already exist in MasterMap. So utilizing that detailed Ordnance Survey data in the process is really beneficial. And there's all sorts of tools which Simon will demonstrate in a few minutes. But what's important is that the measurements are automatically calculated. So if you create an area within CAD Corp Sys Desktop, you don't need to worry about doing any further calculations, because that's all done automatically within the application itself, which make it great when you get to the reporting stage of the process. So the data can be exported just as a simple CSV document that can therefore be brought in, and further analysis can be done in Excel, for example. Or, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a book plotter application, which is free for CAD Corp customers to run within CAD Corp Sys Desktop, which effectively makes a map book either in a PDF format, or you can send it straight to the printer, and that creates a map book. So if you've defined the estate, you can print an estate per page, or an asset per page if you want to. There's a key map at the beginning, and you can include measurements and total areas and sum things up, and you can include expressions and things in that as well to give you the answers that you want. So book plotter within CAD Corp Sys Desktop is a great way to generate a PDF map booklet, which can then be shared with contractors or the tender process or whoever it might be. CAD Corp Sys Web Map is also a really good way, because sharing the data using Web Map enables an interactive approach to other organizations or people internally having access to that data. They can obviously pan and zoom the map, they can click on areas to see further information about it, and you can search on areas as well, so you can quickly zoom into particular areas that you're interested in and find out further information about what's going on the ground. So that could be a great way for sharing it with third parties. But also, once the data capture has process has been completed, having this information available for people in a customer contact center, for example, will enable them to get a really good understanding of what's going on the ground. So if they receive a call from a tenant or a member of the public saying that there's a bit of a grass area that hasn't been maintained in a long time and it's overgrown, and shouldn't you be coming along and cutting the grass, you can quickly see that it is your responsibility. You can action that, or you can see that it's not your responsibility, and point them in the appropriate direction, and if you can help further with that. But that saves a lot of time and effort. I think organizations might be taking that query, digging through paper maps or filing cabinets to find out the answer, and then getting back to that person. But this enables the person on the phone just to instantly see what's available and see the data and see and answer that question straight away. We've recently released the capability to drop this web mapping component into a Power BI report, and it's an interactive map with the Power BI report as well. So we're going to show how that can be really useful for sharing grounds maintenance data. We do have another webinar specifically on Power BI coming up in a few weeks, so if you want to know more about that, you can register for it, but we'll show you how that can be useful also. So there's a couple of examples of real life successes. We've got a couple of case studies, and after the webinar, we'll actually send you links to these as well, so you can read up a bit more about it. So Basildon Council have been CADCorp customers for many years, and they recently had a project where they needed to look at a weed control program. So they needed to get an understanding of their responsibilities in terms of what areas needed to be included in this weed control program, how many square areas, and where they were. So CADCorp, this is the example that I mentioned earlier. We utilised, this is a project that CADCorp did on behalf of Basildon Council, and we utilised that master map data and automatically extracted the relevant areas from that, and then used our book plotter tool to generate a map output and also the relevant attributes on that as well. If you have a look at that case study, there's some screenshots of the outputs and a bit more information, so do have a look at that if you're interested. The other real life success is one of our housing customers, Orbit. So this is a presentation that Steve Litchfield from Orbit and I presented at the Housing Technology Conference earlier this year. And Orbit were talking about all the different successes and different ways that they've benefited from web mapping and CADCorp technology. But one of them, and one of the most important, was the estate services team having access to this captured data. And they had contractor savings of over £1 million per annum by being able to accurately define and calculate what work needs to be done on the ground. So that presentation is also available, and we'll send that around afterwards for you to have a look at. Great, I'm now going to hand over to Simon, who's going to talk to you further and utilise CADCorp technology to show you these concepts. Okay, over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Fergus, and good morning. So my demonstration is going to show how a desktop GIS can be used to capture and report on your grounds maintenance responsibilities. We'll then look at how we can increase the commercial value for this data in a web mapping environment. So we recommend that the initial data capture project should be conducted in a desktop GIS. CADCorp SIS Desktop provides all the tools, analysis, and reporting functionality that you need. It can be used by a customer, by CADCorp as a service, or one of our partners. So before we look at the data capture tools, we can perform some detailed data analysis to find out the types of land classification that are present within our land ownership. So I've just launched CADCorp SIS Desktop, and in my project I have a number of overlays. So on the left-hand side, we have the master map topography layer from the Ordnance Survey, and this is the most detailed and accurate mapping of Great Britain. Every feature on this dataset has a land classification as defined by the Ordnance Survey. In SIS Desktop, we recognise all the different classifications as defined by the Ordnance Survey. We can use this data to style the data, but we can also use it to filter the data very easily as well. So on the left-hand side, we can see all the primary classifications in our Ordnance Survey data. So if we turn all of these items off and say we're only interested in the general surface category, hopefully you can see on the map that this category appears to cover most of the green spaces like gardens and outdoor grass areas. We can also supplement this information by turning on paths and roads as well. So this information can be used to analyse what land classifications fall within our land ownership areas. We can also calculate how big these areas are in size in the GIS. This is a much quicker job than obviously sending someone out in the field with a clipboard and a measuring tape. So the land ownership data we are using are titles from the Land Registry. So each polygon is a title deed that shows the extent of an individual property, or it might be a group of adjacent properties if they're owned by the same organisation. You may also see gaps in between the titles where previously owned social housing may have been sold as right to buys. So with the master map and the land registry data, we can now perform some analysis. So the first task for me is to reduce my master map data set to my area of interest. My data set covers all of Great Britain, so I don't really want to be working with all of this data. Social housing organisations will typically have master map data for maybe 100 or 150 metre buffers from their properties. And this is because they're only interested in these areas. So I'm going to select my land ownership polygons from the land registry. I'm then going to use the query builder to query the master map layer. Then I want to find all those master map features that intersect those land ownership polygons. But I'm also going to add a property filter as well, because I want to filter the master map data to only give me polygon items. So I'm going to use an expression, which I'm just going to copy into the query builder. And what I'm using here is an internal sys property called class local. And that basically just identifies whether a feature is a point, line, or polygon. So I'm going to use this to filter the results by polygon. So let's finish the query and copy all of the results to a new layer called OSMM extract. So on the left-hand side, we've added our new layer. We can turn off the OS master map layer, so we can just see those master map features we've filtered. And we can reorder the layers on the left-hand side so we can see our new master map layer and our land ownership boundaries together. So the reason why I only wanted polygons is because I want to run some analysis to count how many land parcels from the master map data fall within each of the land ownership polygons. And to do this, I'm going to use the spatial expression wizard. So I'm going to use the count function at the top here to count the number of parcels. I'm going to select the OS master map extract because I want to count the features in that layer. And at the bottom, just out of interest, we can also see the SQL statement that is being used to perform this query. What that does is it adds an extra column to my land ownership data. So if we now interrogate that data, we can now see this column. And it gives me a count of how many land parcels intersect this land ownership polygon. So this analysis is useful, but I do need to have some more detailed analysis. So I now want to calculate the area of land by OS land classification type. And to do this, I'm going to add a spatial expression. And again, I've got an expression I've already pre-prepared, which I'll copy into Sys Desktop. And basically this expression is going to look at the OS master map extract layer I've just created and find all the features that have a land classification of general surface. And then it will return the size of that area. So on the left-hand side, I'm just going to rename my new column to general surface. And then we'll query that data set again. So I'll query this polygon, and we've now added this extra column, which is telling me there's 726 square meters of general surface land that intersect this land ownership polygon. So the expression can be used multiple times to calculate areas for different OS land classifications. So just an example, I'm going to turn on some additional columns that I've already created, and we'll query that data set again. And we can now see we've got calculations for different land classifications. So we've got building footprint, so 696 square meters of building footprint within this land ownership area. And we can also see information about paths and roads as well. So we could now use this analysis to generate reports on, but I'll cover reporting later on in this demonstration. So this analysis is great because it provides us a detailed overview of the types of land surface in our land ownership area. But for grounds maintenance purposes, it does have some limitations. So firstly, the classifications aren't specific enough. We can't distinguish between grass that falls within a property boundary that the resident will be responsible for, and grass that is in a communal area that should be maintained by my organisation. And secondly, the topographic layer does not identify all the features we need to capture, such as hedges or trees. So for our data capture project, we're going to digitise our grounds maintenance from scratch. So before embarking on a data capture exercise, we need to prepare a project file with all of the resources that we need. This will help us to capture our grounds maintenance responsibilities efficiently. So in this project, it contains a number of overlays. I need to capture my grounds maintenance data. So we're already familiar with the master map layer. Aerial imagery, as Fergus mentioned before, this is a great resource for a data capture exercise. I mean, it can be used to identify the locations of features that are recorded on the master map layer, like hedges and trees. Adopted highways, so this can be a tricky data set to get hold of. I mean, it really depends if your local authority have released this data as open data. However, it can identify verges that fall within your land ownership, but are in fact maintained by the local authority as part of their adopted road network. If you cannot get a copy of this data, then most authorities do share this information on a map on their website. We have our property data, because it's always important to know where your properties are. And then finally in the project, we have our grounds maintenance layer. So all my responsibilities will be captured against this layer. Before you set up your overlay, you'll need to define what information you need to capture. So for this project, we've agreed to capture 4 types of grounds maintenance: grass, hedges, trees, and hard standing. And for every feature we capture in the GIS, we want to identify what it is. We also want to capture its area and length depending on the features we're working with. This is important so we can calculate our grounds maintenance costs. We can see on the map already that there are some features being captured already. So let's have a look at the table behind the grounds maintenance layer. We can see that we're capturing the grounds maintenance type. And we also have included some of those internal SIS properties that Fergus mentioned for area and length, which are automatically calculated by SIS Desktop when new features are added. To make your data capture less time consuming, in SIS Desktop, we can utilize feature tables. Feature tables are a fast, efficient way of controlling the display of data, but they're also great for capturing attribute information quickly. So let me show you a feature table I've created for this layer. So in my feature table, I have created the 4 grounds maintenance types that we're going to capture. And each one has a different style so that we can distinguish between them as we capture them on the map. So we have our grass, we have our hard standing, we have our hedges, and we have our trees. So with all of our data and the feature table in place, we can now use some of the SIS Desktop tools to capture data. So I've identified this parcel of land here as grass, so we want to add this to our grounds maintenance layer. So first of all, we're going to use the polygon capture tool. And in the construction mode, I'm going to use the simple mode. So when we start to capture our data, you can see some feedback above the cursor, and these are snap codes. And in this example, we can see there's vertex above the cursor. So this means if we click on the mouse, we are snapping to a precise point on the master map data. And that means we can capture our asset very quickly. Once we have captured the geometry, we can then classify it in its attribute data. So in the type column, we can assign the grounds maintenance type. And as we look on the map, as I classify this as grass, we can see that the feature styles accordingly. This list is coming from that feature table I just showed you. So this means we can complete the attribute information really quickly, but we're also capturing it accurately as well. There is no sort of free text field here, so we won't get a scenario where all of our classifications are entered differently. For example, text being capitalized, not capitalized, or maybe spelled incorrectly. So the simple construction mode I've just showed you does have its uses, but for mass data capture where large, complicated features are involved, then the trace function is really the tool for the job. So I'm going to change my construction mode to trace, and I want to capture this feature as hard standing. So with the trace mode enabled and holding down the control key, I can click at 2 locations on this feature. It finds that feature on the master map really quickly, and then I can commit that to my grounds maintenance layer. And again, on the left-hand side, I can then assign this hard standing, and we'll see the style of the feature update accordingly on the map as well. I also need to capture a hedge as well. So on this piece of grass, parallel to the top bit of this grass, we have a hedge which is running at offset by a meter. We can use this desktop tools to capture this. So I'm going to select the line string tool. We're going to set the construction mode to trace again, because I still want to utilize the master map data. And I'm going to set an offset to 1 meter. So again, I'm going to capture the hedge. So I'm going to put my starting point, add my end point. And once I've committed that feature, we can see that line string has now been added 1 meter offset from the top of that grass. And again, on the left-hand side, we can then classify this as a hedge. And now finally, I'm going to capture a tree. So let's just pan to the east of my property or my estate. And I'm going to turn on my OS imagery data. And we believe this tree falls within our land ownership and we are responsible for maintaining it. So we can just double check that by turning on our land ownership data, and we can see, yes, it does fall within our land ownership. So we can now capture that data against our grounds maintenance layer. So I'm going to use the point capture tool. I'm going to roughly place a point in the center of the tree. And then again, for the item properties, I'm going to set this as a tree. So I've just shown you a couple of examples of using data capture tools in SIS Desktop to capture new data. But if you have electronic files of scans of your old paper maps, you might find it easier to load these scans into the GIS. These can then be used as a backdrop as you digitize new data over them. So let me just show you an example. So for now, I'm going to turn off my grounds maintenance layer and just see our master map data. I'm now going to insert my scanned plan. And we'll just move that over to the right-hand side. And it's added that as a new layer. So on the left-hand side, we'll rename this paper map. So when you load in a scanned image, it might not be georeferenced. This means it won't be in the correct geographical location to be useful to work with. We can fix this by using the rubber sheeting process, which allows me to shift the scanned image into the correct geographical location. So the first thing I need to do is add an internal overlay. And we're going to call this layer displacement. And we'll make that layer our current layer. So the first part of the process is to create some displacements. In simple terms, we need to associate specific points on the scanned image to their real-world location. So let's start by creating some displacements. So I'm going to zoom into the scanned image and we'll select this corner of grass here. Click on there once, and then we need to navigate to the real-world location on our master map data and make that association between the scanned image and that real-world location. I now need to just add 3 further displacements. So let's select the property or the corner of the property at 223 and find that same location on the master map data. We'll use the corner of the rear of number 8 and again find that real world location. And we need to create 1 more displacement. So let's choose the corner of the property at number 63. And again, find that on our master map data like so. So I've now made my associations between the scan and the master map data. And we can now use that to perform the shift of the scan into the correct geographical location. And to do this, I'm going to use a process. So we're going to run the process on our paper map, which is our scanned image. We'll then use a rubber sheeting command, and then we just need to specify the layer which has our displacement. So that's the associations I've just created between the scan and my master map data. We'll create this as a new layer. So we'll call this georeference PDF or georeference map. And we'll finish the process. And if we turn off the old data, we can now see that scanned image has now been placed in its correct geographical location. So we can just see that a little bit better. I'm just going to rearrange the order of the layers on the left-hand side. And we'll also adjust the styling of the master map so we can see the scan through the data. And there we go. So we can now see that map with the master map data. And as we turn off and on the scan, we can now see our grounds maintenance responsibilities, and we can now capture them against our layer. So the advantage of this approach is that you have everything in one place. You have your old georeference paper plans, your new GIS layer, and you can now use the SIS desktop tools to capture your data. So to summarize, the key to sort of fast and efficient data capture is to define what you're going to capture at the beginning. Get all of your data together that you'll need to capture your data. Select or set up a feature table for that quick asset classification and styling. And then finally, use the CAD-COP SIS advanced editing tools like the trace tool for super fast data capture. So once we have captured our grounds maintenance responsibilities, it is now easy to generate the reports that we need. So to assist me in my reporting, the most important data set I need is a layer showing my estate or neighbourhood boundaries. And this is shown with the red outline here. I need these boundaries so I can report against them. In fact, you can perhaps use any geographical boundary that suits your needs. So my first example, my organisation manages its own grounds maintenance, and we need to generate a bill of quantities to describe the jobs we need to carry out. This report is typically an Excel spreadsheet that identifies the surface area to maintain, how often it is maintained, and its cost. And these costs are typically calculated in Excel, but we need to extract all the surface areas and lengths from the GIS to prepare these costs. So let's have a look at the table behind my estate boundary layer. So my estate layer has some similar spatial queries in place, just like the example I showed you earlier when we measured the different OS land classifications. So first of all, we've got a column for our estate name. We have the total amount of grass and hard standing within each of those estates. We have the total length of hedges and the total number of trees. With that in place, we can now use the export tools in CAD-COP SIS Desktop to export the data to CSV. So I'll export this to my desktop. And we'll go to the desktop and we'll open that file. And so now I have all of that data outside of that GIS in Excel, and I can now build up my bill of quantities and add the extra columns I need to produce all the costings that I require. So let me just show you an example of what that might look like. So here's an example of a bill of quantity. So at the top, we have all of our different grounds maintenance types that we've captured in the GIS. On the left-hand side, we have each of our individual estates. And then we also have all the data, all the information that we've pulled out of the GIS. So we've got our area of grass, we have our area of hard standing, a length of all of our hedges, and a number of trees. And then we can use that in Excel to then create our additional columns. So it might be adding the frequency of how often these assets are maintained, what the unit cost might be, and again, the total annual cost for maintaining these assets throughout the year. All of these costs can then be added up to create your final estate cost and your overall grounds maintenance responsibility for all of your estates. In my second example, my organisation wants to go out to tender and subcontract the work to an external service provider. So a tabular report is useful, but a map is so much better to show the areas that need to be maintained. So the book plotter is a free add-in that is available to download from the CAD-COP website. It allows me to run an automated process to create a PDF book of maps for all of my estates. So I can show that all the areas that need to be managed. So let me just show you an example of an output. So the first map in my PDF book is for Park Royal Estate in Brighton. And this map shows the extent of the estate boundary and all the grounds maintenance responsibilities within it. On the right-hand side, we have supplementary information. So we've got a summary of how much grass and hard standing there is, the length of the hedges and how many trees again. So the same information that we exported out into CSV. There's also a count of how many properties there are as well within this estate. So because I have 5 estates in my data, we have 5 maps in our PDF, each showing the grounds maintenance responsibilities for each estate. The book plotter tool is an easy way to generate maps of all of my estates, but it also gives me the flexibility to add all of the important numbers for calculating the grounds maintenance costs. I can now share this information as part of my tender documentation. So I've just shown you 2 examples of how we can report on our grounds maintenance in tabular and map form, but we can get greater value from this data by sharing it across the organization. So one example is to share this data in a web mapping solution like CADCOP WebMap. WebMap is an easy-to-use web mapping application that allows users to view and interrogate GIS data in a user-friendly way. It also gives other departments in your organization access to important data. So for example, a customer has contacted a call center because an area of grass outside their property is overgrown. The call center can check if we maintain this area of grass. So if we take the customer's postcode and add this into our search, we can then navigate to that location. And on the left-hand side, we can then turn on that grounds maintenance data. So the customer's described to me that area of grass. And yes, we can see that we're responsible for it. So we can pass this information onto the relevant team to deal with. If we don't maintain that area of grass, then we can help the customer and direct them to the local council. Providing access to this type of data allows my colleagues to have the knowledge to respond to customer queries immediately and confidently. We can also use our web map as a platform for the ongoing management of grounds maintenance data. So we use CADCOP SIS Desktop for that initial data capture project, but we can use the editing capability in web map to make edits to the data as our grounds maintenance responsibilities evolve. So here we have our edit add-in for web map. And you remember we captured this hard standing feature in the desktop, but this feature is now changed to grass. So if we now make the grounds maintenance layer editable, I will now select that hard standing feature we created. I'll edit the attributes, and in the drop down, I can choose to change it to grass. And as I commit this change, we'll see that the feature will style accordingly on the map. Maybe this area here now needs to be added to our grounds maintenance responsibilities. So we can use the editing capabilities to add new features as well. So I'm going to capture a new polygon. I'm going to enable snapping because we can snap to master map data in the web environment as well. And then we'll capture this data in the web environment. Again, we'll assign the classification, so it's hard standing. And we'll see as we close this dialog that the feature is styled accordingly. This functionality is great because it provides a simple interface that can be shared amongst a select group of colleagues who can be responsible for keeping the data up to date. So the example I've been focusing on is the grounds maintenance data. However, WebMap can also be used to share other business data to the wider organization, providing more value for your investment in GIS technology. So let's just turn off our grounds maintenance data. And you may have data like stock performance, so you can see how your stock is performing. You may have information on gas certificates, so we can see when our gas certificates are due or maybe they're overdue. We can do some analysis and see how long our properties are typically empty for, looking at void times. And a final use we could use it maybe for planned repairs, so we can show when scheduled repairs are due in our properties. So WebMap is one example of sharing business data to a wider audience, but more and more organizations are using Microsoft Power BI to create interactive visualizations of their business data. Microsoft Power BI is an analytical tool that enables you to share interactive reports across your organization. So CADCOP WebMap for Power BI allows you to embed a map into a Power BI report. So here I've created a report using the grounds maintenance data. So on the left, we have our list of estates in our portfolio. Below that, we have a wheel showing a percentage breakdown of all the grounds maintenance types for all of my estates. To the right of that, we have the total annual cost to maintain all of my responsibilities. And then to the right of this, we have a table providing a detailed breakdown by estate and grounds maintenance type as well. And then finally, we have our web map embedded into the report, which is showing our grounds maintenance data. The map has pan and zoom controls. We can add a cursor location in the bottom right-hand corner. And we also have a layer control as well, so you can turn and switch between different layers. The Power BI report is dynamic, so when I start to filter or interrogate the data, all of these visuals will update accordingly. So let's look at our list of estates, and I want to focus on the Lea Hurst Court. So as I click on that estate, all of our visuals have now updated. So to the right, our embedded web map is now focusing on the extent of that estate. We can see all of the grounds maintenance data, and we can also see purple pins which indicate each of our features. The bottom left-hand corner, so the wheel has also updated to show our percentage breakdown of assets. We can now see a new number, so this annual cost is relevant to the Lea Hurst Court estate. And then to the right, our table has also changed as well, so we're just seeing the information for Lea Hurst Court. Each of the visuals are dynamic, so even in this table view, if I say I just want to see the hard standing data, I can click on that to apply that filter. And again, all of my visuals update again, even including the map where we can just see the pins for our hard standing features. So Microsoft Power BI is a great analytical tool for creating visually interactive reports. The addition of an embedded map from Web Map provides that geographical context to your data and increased value, not just from your data, but your GIS solution as well. So that brings my demonstration to an end. I hope you found that very useful. And just to summarize, I started with GIS Desktop, and we explored how we can analyze the OS master map layer to find out what land classifications intersect our land ownership boundaries. I showed you how you can capture your data using some of the data capture tools in GIS Desktop and how to georeference scanned plans to help you with that process. We then looked at how we can generate reports, both tabular and in map form, to produce a bit of quantities to go out to tender. And then the final part of my demonstration, we showed the value of sharing grounds maintenance data in Web Map and in Power BI so that departments across your organizations can utilize the data. So I'm now going to pass you back over to Fergus, who will wrap up and answer any questions.
Excellent, thank you, Simon. We're just going to hand back over to control to me, so you should be able to see my presentation again. So if you do have any questions, like Simon said, use the question panel and answer them. I can see a few have come through, so we'll come over to those in just a second. That's great. So just the key takeaways to discuss. The CAD Corp GIS Desktop, as you saw there, is ideal for data capture. There's lots of tools in there, advanced tools to create accurate and very easy data capture, the whole process. This can either be completed by CAD Corp, a partner, or the customer, you yourselves can complete this yourselves, as discussed earlier. It can either be automatic or it can be a manual approach. So there's different techniques depending on exactly the requirements of your project. And there's lots of pre-existing data, such as the master map data and the land registry data that already exist for generating these outputs, whether they're maps, builds of quantities, utilizing CAD Corp GIS Web Map or Power BI for sharing those results and making them available to the wider organization or other organizations as well. And those two success stories are just two of many. We've got other case studies on the CAD Corp website, but like I said, we'll send over links to those two after the webinar today. Just before I come on to questions, if you do want to get in touch with CAD Corp, do get in touch with your account manager if you have one. If not, drop us an email or give us a call. We're all up and running as normal during these times, so do get in touch with us. If you are really keen to continue the conversation today, do let us know. One of the survey questions gives you the option to to do that, and either myself or one of my colleagues will get in touch and give you a call after the webinar. So if you're keen to continue the conversation, do let us know, and we'll be really eager to give you a call and catch up on that. So that would be great. So just before we finish, let's have a review of the questions that people have asked. We've got quite a few here, so that's good. I'm not sure whether we're going to manage to get through all of them, but we'll try. So one is, where can we get OS imagery from? So the master map imagery layer that you saw is a great source of information because it matches perfectly with the Ordnance Survey master map topography layer. And it can be supplied either from the Ordnance Survey direct, or probably more likely through one of the Ordnance Survey partners. So whoever you license your Ordnance Survey data from, speak to them and they can provide it for you. If you're not a commercial or a housing organization and you license your data commercially, if you get access to it through other ways, then again, you'll probably need to license imagery data commercially, but there are other options out there as well in terms of getting access to imagery data. So do speak to us further. We can give you more information about that, but if you need to license OS imagery data, speak to an Ordnance Survey partner or whoever licenses your data currently. Someone's asked a bit more about Microsoft Power BI and how that's provided. So yeah, that's a license that CADCorp can provide. There is a small cost to that, but it's provided as a visualization, and you can invest in that, and you can utilize either your existing web map environment, or if you don't have a CADCorp web map environment, then we can provide you with the map to drop into your Power BI environment. So do get in touch, and we can speak to you further about the options around that. But like I said, there's another webinar coming up as well, which will go into more detail about Power BI. So that's probably a really good one for you. Another one, can we use CADCorp when working from home on a laptop? Yes, absolutely. Do get in touch with us. We've got special licenses for CADCorp customers who can't get access to their normal licenses due to working from home. So we've got a number of options, and we've supplied many CADCorp customers in the last few weeks with special licenses or different ways to access your licenses. So there's lots of options. Do get in touch about that. There's a number of other questions. I can see one here. How are you delivering your training whilst everyone's working from home? Obviously, our training is normally face-to-face in person, but obviously that's not possible just now. So we've got access to some professional training, web-based training applications, which enable the same level and the same quality of training to be delivered via a web browser, via a web session. And we've delivered a few of those over the last few weeks, and we've got more scheduled in over the next few weeks as well. So we've got scheduled courses, and we can do specific courses for your organization as well. There's quite a lot more questions here, so what we'll do, we'll get in touch with you directly to answer those questions. I'm very aware that we're coming to the end of the time allocated to today, so thank you all for your questions. Thank you for joining us today. Do get in touch, or if you want to continue the conversation today, do tick that box in the questionnaire, which will appear shortly. Thank you and goodbye.